2 years ago, I woke up on that October 7th morning, my phone full of messages. War in Gaza, war with Hamas, bold letters from family members. And before I came to shul, it was a yontiv, and just glanced at my phone in case there was an emergency. I started to learn a little bit more about what had happened. Been a massive invasion, and heard about people in utmost fear in the kibbutzim with Hamas members still around, and there were footage I saw of terrorists driving cars through what looked like suburban neighborhoods of Israel. It was surreal. And I spoke to my brother-in-law in Israel, who's Israeli, and he told me early reports had said that there were many, many casualties. It hadn't come up publicly yet, but he said there were many, many casualties, and that some had been taken captivity back to Gaza. And he says, you know what that means. And I knew what that meant, the Gaza, that place of fear and darkness, and it's a living nightmare for them, but also everyone, all of us. And I remember seeing footage of the days afterwards from a wedding in the south of Israel. Everybody looked shell-shocked and trying to celebrate. And then a famous singer had crashed the wedding to try and bring some sense of love. It was very sweet. And a religious singer, it wasn't a religious wedding, but he was a religious singer, and he sang V'hisha Amda, right, from the Pesach Seder. And the one who came in every generation to our fathers and to us, for not only one enemy has risen up against us to destroy us, but in every generation to rise up to destroy us, but the Holy One, blessed be He, delivers us from their hands. And it was a day that ended up affecting the whole world, but at first it really affected us more than anybody else. And I remember just feeling all alone and in shock, walking down the streets of the neighborhood, and the world just going on as normal. And remember hearing about those stories of people and seeing the images of people in New York celebrating on October 8th, even October 7th, other places, and those medieval images coming out of Gaza of people celebrating the captives being paraded through the streets, and just that feeling of weakness, of loss. It was so difficult to explain to others who weren't feeling a sadness. And outrage, on one hand, outrage and anger at the barbarism, that the failures that led to it also. And here we are, Sukkot, two years later, and so much has happened, so much has happened. The march in Washington and the month afterwards, and that solidarity across the aisle at first, but still that sense of Israel's position being so precarious, with Hezbollah and Iran still waiting to attack. But also those stories of heroism that we shared here in different events. The lady who charmed the terrorists, spoke Arabic to them and gave them cookies until the IDF came. Or the grandfather whose grandchildren were living down in the periphery and got in the car himself because the army was nowhere to be seen, and drove down and rescued his grandchildren himself with his handgun. The woman guard who somehow saved a whole kibbutz by her actions single-handedly. But more than anything was the feeling of loss that was there, and of fear and trauma that it provoked. The whole country had been traumatized, and it changed Israel, and it changed the whole Jewish world. And yes, there were the other side too. Israel really did pull itself up from it by its bootstraps in those first few weeks, and there was this outpouring of volunteering and of goodwill, of citizens taking into their own hands to help their fellow Israelis, even where the government was absent in those days. Those pictures of reservists flying in from the four corners of the world in planes full of 20-something-year-olds flying back to go try and defend Israel, the patriotism, the Israelis saying the Shema on their way to war, Am Yisrael Chai, which was really an anthem of this free Soviet Jewry movement, but which came back and became, in some ways, the anthem of the last few years. The Jewish people lives, a sense of not letting the spirit of return of the Jewish people in the last 70, 80 years. It would not go back to the way it was before that. All those stories, people, men and 40, 50 years old who went to fight as reservists, gave up their lives as parents, as high-tech professionals. And here in this synagogue, we ended up writing notes to soldiers, recording videos. And I know so many Jews from this last 2 years who had a connection to Israel, but it wasn't anything that strong. But in those, especially those first few months, just became intense Zionists, did all that catching up on what it means to be a Zionist, read every book they could find, started wearing Stars of David, Israeli flags, who lost friendships of people they knew but didn't care about it, educating colleagues about all of it, and the hostages, right? The hostages who became the rallying cry of the whole Jewish world. Because if October 7th started with that act that was so callous about the preciousness of life and just descended into a torture and no sense of dignity, human dignity, then we're going to do the opposite. We're going to hold on to every life of every hostage as if they were a beloved family member. And so we put up our posters wondering would people tear them down. We marched, we sang, bring them home. We watched as some did come back, and we watched as some did not come back. And we remember Hirsch and the other captives who didn't make it. And we watched the world turn more and more against us. People whom we considered smart were soaking up the most blunt propaganda that there was white supremacy in Israel. Or remember when a colleague of my wife, who's a psychologist, asked her, is it true that there's a separate line just for white people at Tel Aviv airport? Or someone at a conference, a major psychology conference, put up a picture of the human brain, and there was an arrow pointing to a section of the brain where a so-called section of the brain where there's rape comes from, and the same place was an arrow that said Zionism comes from it. This ridiculous propaganda that went out there. And we saw this military successes against Hamas, against Hezbollah, moments when that stranglehold around our Jewish homeland that had been so fearful did evaporate for a time. And these past few months, more than anything, really more than anything, this terrible war in Gaza, just dragging on and on, the longest war in Israel's history, and tapping all the resources of the country, the soldiers, the morale, diplomatic, just creating so much division and concern. And this summer, more than anything, the quagmire, the moral quagmire, has just been unbearable of what's been happening there and how it's torn apart our hearts. And the violent anti-Semitism in Colorado and Washington and Manchester, and the violent marches, and Israel becoming a pariah. A month ago, a number of us here went to see the movie about the Supernova Festival, had the footage from the Hamas body cams as they were doing their terrible act. And what was so striking is that it looked like a movie. It looked like a Hollywood movie. It looked like a parody of a movie of how terrorists should act. But it was actually real. And it was an act of witnessing, just like the act of witnessing the Holocaust, what it felt like. And here we are 2 years later, and it's still hard to believe that it actually happened. And we can't believe all the suffering that happened and all the suffering that it led to. And there's still so much denial. And I remember when Alan was many of us were at the Oak Park Village Hall meeting, and they were discussing the resolution that was brought by the pro-Palestinian side, lobbying them to have an official village resolution about a ceasefire. And Alan spoke about the sexual violence that happened on October 7th, and people started screaming, no, it wasn't true, it's all lies, it's all lies. And just recently, the Israeli government made public all the raw footage of everything that happened that they have in pictures, because there was still so much denial. just so people could see and know. And the pain is still raw 2 years later, and it will take a generation for it all to heal. And yet here we are on Sukkot, and there is this promise of peace. It's still tenuous and may not happen, or may take a long time, and there's no guarantee there will be any different than any of the other ceasefires of Hamas. But there is the potential, there's something else, potential for the hostages to come home, for that wound to heal, and also for everyday Gazans to know peace, which would also very important. And war is so ugly, and peace is so sweet, and life is a sukkah, and we cannot lose hope. And so we have to make the sukkah of life as sweet as possible, and fill it with the people we love and the moments we cherish, as tenuous and unpredictable as it can all be, moments to cherish all the good actions we can perform to bring meaning to it. So today we remember all the fear, we remember all the pain, all the courage, the solidarity. And maybe we can say what this day taught us, that it's not as Ecclesiastes is that we read during this period or begins with. It's not life is vanity, vanity of all vanities. It's the opposite. Life is beautiful, life is precious. It's worth living every moment of it and fighting for it. And life is full of joys and life is full of sadnesses. But it should always be meaningful and full of passion, whatever we care about, whatever we're doing, who we are, wherever we come from. And for us Jews, life has always been a sukkah. We can also make a sukkah home. And we love this home here in America, and we love this home in Israel. And may peace come, may our love deepen, may we never forget what happened. Chag Sameach.